Good afternoon or good evening, everyone. I will be discussing the nature and criteria of a good psychological test. To start, let's define what psychological test is. A psychological test is a systematic procedure for observing a person's behavior or performance, describing it with the aid of numerical scale or category system. When we say numerical scale, we are pertaining to a measurement here. It is used as a way of measuring differences between people and differences in the same person over time. Let's compare what a test is to a psychological test. So a test is a critical examination, observation, or evaluation. A set of questions or problems to measure someone's skills, knowledge, or ability. When we see a psychological test, this is a standardized and objective technique or tools of eliciting and assessing a sample of behavior. A test that assesses an individual's abilities, aptitudes, interests, or personality based on systematically obtained sample of behavior. A psychological test is more of complex compared to a test. Pag sinabi nating test, simpleng test lang siya. This is an ordinary test. Nag-exam ka, academic exam, paper and pencil. That is a test. When we say psychological test, you are measuring an individual's capacity or personality in a psychological manner. Measurement. The assignment of numerals to objects or events according to some rules. It consists of rules in assigning numbers to objects in such a way as to represent qualities of attributes. When we say rules, measurement has rules. It is pertaining to a statistics. So merong mga sinusunod na guidelines sa statistics para before magkaroon ng scoring and interpretation ng isang psychological test. When we say psychological measurement, the assignment of numerals to characteristics or attributes of individual according to rules. So dun sa psychological test, kapag ka nag-score ka na, ginawa mo na yung scoring, at ginawa mo yung psychological measurement, nagkakaroon ng psychological meaning yung statistics na ginawa mo as procedure doon sa score nung psychological test. Psychological testing, administered in a series of items in which the individual must give a response in order to assess psychological constructs such as ability, cognitive, emotional functioning, or personality. So ito yung mga, there are different types of psychological tests. So ito yung mga example nun, ability, cognitive, emotional, and personality. Its partner is psychometrics. Psychometrics is the field of study concerned with the theory and technique of psychological measurement, which includes the measurement of knowledge, abilities, attitudes, personality traits, and educational measurement. So sa psychometrics, iba siya sa normal scoring ng isang test. Sa psychometrics, theory-based siya, isa siyang objective, yung nagkakaroon siya ng interpretation na already standardized or common na siya sa world of psychology. So we have the nature of psychological tests. We have two types, the typical behavior and the maximal performance. When we say typical behavior, this is also known as the non-cognitive measures. It completes the instrument by describing what they would commonly do in a given situation. These measures typically do not have correct or wrong answers. Examples are personality test and interest test. So meron ding dalawang factor pa under typical behavior or tinatawag nating non-cognitive test or measures. First one is the structured. May ask the tester true or false or whether they engage in various activities or not. Sinasabing structured, example nito is the BPI, the Basic Personality Inventory, the 16PF. So pag sinabi nating unstructured naman, this provide projective stimulus. So ano ba yung tinatawag nating projective stimulus? Ito yung test na nagre-reveal ng hidden emotion ng tao. So kapag ka objective test, tinatanong siya kung true or false, i-rate mo lang kung kumbaga sa Likert scale, i-rate mo kung kung gaano mo, kung you agree or you disagree. Pag sinabi nating unstructured naman, or unstructured test, ito yung ginagamitan naman ng mga projective tests such as, for example, the TAT or the thematic apperception test. So nagkakaroon ng interpretation yung sagot nung subject mo based sa mga hidden emotions niya kasi nagkikwento siya based dun sa test na binigay mo using pictures. When we say maximal performance, this is known as the cognitive measures of test. These measures ask people to answer questions and solve problems as they possibly can. It has correct answers because it measures cognitive performance of an individual. For examples, achievement test or aptitude test. Dito naman, mini-measure mo na kasi yung intelligence ng isang tao. Kaya magkakaroon talaga ng correct and wrong answer. So typically, mas interesting sagutan yung typical behavior compared sa maximal performance. Characteristics of good psychological test. So we have the uniformity, object measurement, the comprehensiveness, and the psychometric properties. First is the uniformity. It refers to the uniformity or standardization of administering and scoring of tests. So nakita ulit natin yung word na standardization. Pag sinabi nating standardized test na, ibig sabihin common na siya or ibig sabihin matagal na siyang ginagamit, universally accepted na siya, or somehow this is already based in theory and a lot of researches na yung dumaan dito. So this characteristic is required for any objective psychological test. So meron tayong two types of tests and or later on madidiscuss din natin yun. So, the objective and the projective test. So, dito, kailangan yung mga objective test mo ay merong uniformity na para matawag siya na good psychological test. A test administration and scoring results minimal errors and hence the test is always valid. Of course, pagka uniformity or pag sinabi nga nating standardized na yung test, hindi na siya nagkakaroon ng error. Not unless mali yung pagkaka-check mo or yung scoring mo. Hindi na siya nagkakaroon ng error kasi based na siya sa facts. Kasi napag-aralan na siya ng madaming research or madami na siyang somehow napagdaanan na research base. There is no bias when a test has its uniformity. Object measurement of difficulty. The determination of the difficulty level of an item or of the whole test is based on objective empirical procedures. Items in the test should have moderate level of difficulty. Of course, maganda nga yung test mo, pero may nakakapasa ba sa test mo? Yon. So, kailangan moderate lang yung level of difficulty natin. Hindi siya gaanong kahirap at hindi rin siya ganun kadali. So we have the discrimination index. Paano ba natin masasabi yon? So this measure of how many subjects in different groups give the correct answer to individual questions in a test or how well the items discriminate between them. For example, you have 5 questions. So ilan ba yung nakasagot ng tama dun sa item number 1 mo, ilan yung nagkamali sa item number 2 mo, ilan ulit yung tama sa item number 3 mo. So that is this discrimination index. Mine-measure niya kung ilan yung mga nakakasagot ng tama or mali dun sa given mo na questions. Comprehensiveness. This refers to the inclusion of various functions related to the topic of the test. The test should comprehend the data and should have relevant content in it. So, dumedepende naman to kung sino yung, for example, target subject mo. For example, target mo are grade 10 pupils or grade 10 students. Hindi ka pwedeng basta lang maglagay lang ng basta mathematics na gusto mong i-measure. Kailangan present doon yung, for example, calculus, trigonometry, physics. So, kailangan may basis siya or yung mga items mo ay sumasakto naman sa kung sino yung target age mo na gusto mong i-measure yung kanilang cognitive or yung ability nila. we have the psychometric properties. The three psychometric properties should be present in a good psychological test. So masasabi mong good psychological test siya if meron siyang reliability, which refers to obtaining the same result after multiple testing. Masasabi mong reliable or merong reliability yung test mo kung kahit paulit-ulit mo ng sinagutan, for example, ang personality test, pero same result pa rin or same score, same interpretation pa din yung nakukuha mo kahit magkaibang time mo siya sinagutan. Validity, the test must measure what it is intended to measure. Kung personality test yan, kung ang pinasasagot mo, dapat na measure talaga niya yung personality nung taong pinasagutan mo or yung iyong test taker. Norms, the average test score to compare the results of others by establishing a point of comparison of frame of reference. Sa norms naman, ito yung halimbawa, tapos mo nang mapasagutan ng psychological test or ng test yung mga subjects mo, yung mga test takers mo. So, you will now have its scoring. So, magbibigay ka ng average or somehow ng passing score dun sa specific test mo para malaman mo sino yung mataas at sino yung mababa, sino yung naka-attain ng high score and low score. In that way, mako-compare mo kung ilan yung naka-high score, ilan din yung naka-low score. So dun ka magdedepende kung yung psychological test mo ba ay good or it is bad. So people behind the test, sino ba yung mga taong behind the test or sino yung mga gumagamit? So first one is the test developer. Tests are created for research studies, publication, or as modifications of existing tests. Sa test developer, ito yung gumagawa ng test or sila yung nagpo-provide ng mga psychological tests dun sa mga different institutions. So the test user, tests are used by a wide range of professionals. Ang test user, tayo yon. So tayo yung nagbibigay sa kanila ng test or tayo yung mga qualified na pwedeng bumili or mag-interpret ng mga psychological test. So lastly is the test taker. So walang sense yung iyong mga psychological test kung wala naman nagte-take ng test mo. So a test taker is anyone who is subject of an assessment or evaluation. Sila ay tinatawag na test taker. Where to use psychological test? Ano bang sense ng psychological test? So of course, merong mga different settings kung saan mahalaga ang psychological test. First one is the educational settings. Students are required to undergo school ability test and achievement test. So without psychological test or without psychometricians, guidance counselors, or psychologists, hindi makakapag take or makakapag-undergo ang mga students sa mga test na kailangan nilang i-take before silang pumasok sa school or before the academic year or even at the middle of their academic year. Kailangan may mini-measure sa kanila. So the diagnostic test may be used to identify areas of educational intervention. Educators may also make informal evaluations of their students. Pag sinabi nating informal evaluations, hindi naman lahat ng educators ay registered psychologist or psychometrician. So tinatawag natin silang informal. Ibig sabihin pwede silang mag-administer ng test but they cannot interpret it. So next one is the clinical settings. Assessment tools are used to help screen for a diagnosed behavior problems. So this test is being used in hospitals, inpatient or outpatient clinics, or even a private practice lang ng clinical setting. So of course, it is not enough to just observe someone para ma-diagnose mo kung ano ba yung behavioral problems niya or kung meron ba siyang any psychological problem or disorder. Kailangan talaga gumamit ng psychological test to measure it or to stand it para meron kang basis para pag naka-create ka ng psychological test or ng psychological assessment, meron kang support na ito yung naging measurement mo para mag-come up ka sa diagnosis. When we say counseling settings naman, the goal of assessment in the setting is improvements in adjustment or the productivity. So ginagamit siya again sa schools, prison, or government or private institutions. So hindi ka lang basta magka-counsel, kailangan din merong pinagkuhaan yung magiging counseling mo using psychological test para magkaroon ka again ng basis dun sa iyong counseling. Business and military settings, decisions regarding careers of personnel are made with a variety of achievement, aptitude, interest, motivational, and other objective tests. Of course, kailangan before kang ma-hire sa isang job or even sa military settings and other institutions, kailangan malaman muna nung employer mo kung ikaw ba ay nagko-qualify doon sa ina-applyan mo or doon sa magiging designation mo sa job mo. So government and organizational credentialing includes governmental licensing, certification, or credentialing professionals. Lahat naman ng mga professionals like psychologists, psychiatrists, other physicians, psychometricians, guidance counselors, dumaan sa psychological test or sa test like the board exam bago nila makuha yung mga licenses nila. So controlling the use of psychological test. Of course, hindi natin lagi kailangan ginagamit yung psychological test. So these are the reasons why. First is unable to prevent general familiarity with the test content, which would invalidate the test. Kapag paulit-ulit mo nang sinasagutan yung specific test or even a psychological test, of course, may invalid na siya. Kasi, for example, ikaw ay isang school psychometrician, paulit-ulit mong sinagutan yung LSAT. Of course, invalid yung magiging result mo or yung score mo kasi maaaring ma-perfect mo na yan. Kasi paulit-ulit mo na ngang chine-checkan, paulit-ulit mo na ini-interpret, ini-score. So of course, memorya mo na siya, which will make the test invalid kapag ka familiar ang isang tao doon or there is a too much familiarity. Second one is unable to ensure that the test is used by qualified examiner. So yun nga yung lagi nating binabanggit na ang kailangan ang mga nag-i-interpret lang, nag-a-administer, nagso-score, and nag-i-interpret ng psychological test ay yung mga qualified lang. Kumbaga, sila lang yung may mga licenses. Qualified examiner, okay, sa Philippines, meron tayong Republic Act 10029 or we call it the psychology law. Ang pwede lang mag-administer, mag-score, at mag-interpret again ng test ay mga psychologists and licensed psychometrician. Test administration. So ito yung mga mahahalagang bagay na kailangan nating tandaan kung ikaw yung magiging examiner. So first one is the advanced preparation of examiners. The most important requirement for good testing procedure is advanced preparation. Memorizing the exact verbal instructions is essential in most individual testing. So itong advanced preparation, kung alam mong may magiging client ka as the examiner or the psychometrician, kailangan nag-prepare ka na. Kung halimbawa, bago ka sa profession mo as the examiner, kailangan basahin mo muna yung manual nung test na ibibigay mo or nung i-administer mo dun sa client mo para malaman mo kung ano yung exact mo na sasabihin. Kasi kung example, nabubulol ka or nagsistutter ka while administering the test, of course, maaaring maapektuhan yung magiging score nung test taker mo. Kasi pwede din siyang, sa first impression niya, hindi siya magta-trust sa'yo. So, a checklist also will help para ma-memorize mo kung ano yung sunod-sunod na procedures na kailangan mong gawin. Testing conditions, an examiner is the one who is responsible in selecting the suitable testing room. This room should be free from undue noise and distraction. Naapektuhan din sa test score yung environment kung saan nagte-take ng test yung examiner mo. So kung example, magbibigay ka ng mga test like the basic personality inventory or the 16PF, yun kasi yung mahahabang test. Hindi ka pwedeng magbigay lang ng isang testing room or ng testing area kung saan maliit yung chair, mainit. Kasi, magiging invalid din yung test kasi nga hindi dahil hindi nila alam yung sagot or hindi dahil, hinulaan nila kundi dahil siguro tinamad sila, puwedeng maging gano'n yung factor nung kung bakit magiging mababa yung score nila. So, kailangan meron tayong adequate lighting, 'wag niyo silang bibigyan ng, madidilim na rooms, ventilation, kung walang aircon sana may proper ventilation, like merong, enough na electric fan para hindi sila masyadong mainitan. So, the seating facilities, the working space for the subject, signage such as testing room, be quiet or turn off your phones na or, mga gadgets pa or things na puwedeng maka-distract sa kanila while taking the test. So, these are my references in this presentation. That will be all for my, report. Thank you for listening.